I'd like to talk a little bit this afternoon about social intelligence. And what I mean by that is not social intelligence of a given individual, but the social intelligence of us as a species, the evolutionary design of us as a species that makes the social world so fundamental to who we are. This realization is relatively new. Biological, behavioral, and cognitive scientists in the 20th century tended to focus on single organisms, organs, cells, intracellular processes, and genes. From the perspective of many scientists during the 20th century, the contributions of the social world to behavior were thought to be best considered later, if at all. Social factors were viewed by many to be of minimal interest with respect to the brain and behavior, because they had no bearing on basic development, structure, or operating processes. To the extent that social factors were thought to be evident, they were thought to be so complicated that they should be considered at a later point in time. Further fueling this focus on the solitary individual was the dominant metaphor of the human mind during the 20th century, and that is the isolated desktop computer, complete with input, processing, short and long-term memory stores, and output mechanisms. The brain was thought to be analogous to the hardware and the mind to the software. How things have changed now that we're in the 21st century. If you had a computer that was connected only to an electrical outlet, you wouldn't have a very powerful computer at all. To understand computers today, one has to appreciate their capabilities as a connected collective. Hominids, of course, have been mobile and broadband connected for hundreds of thousands of years. Indeed, if you asked a zookeeper to create a proper enclosure for the species Homo sapiens, she would list at the top of her concerns obligatorily gregarious, meaning that you would no more house a member of the human family in isolation than you would house emperor penguins in hot desert sand. It simply makes no sense to put a creature in an environment that stretches the genetic leash just quite that far. We like to think of ourselves as rugged individualists, but we're fundamentally social organisms. The demands of social living include learning by social observation, recognize the shifting status of friends and foes, anticipating and coordinating efforts between two or more individuals, using language to communicate, reason, teach, and even deceiving others, orchestrating relationships ranging from pair bonds and families to friends, bands, and coalitions, navigating complex social hierarchies, social norms, and cultural developments, subjugating self-interest to the interests of the pair bond or social group in exchange for the possibility of long-term benefits, recruiting support to sanction individuals who violate group norms, and doing all these across time frames that stretch from the distant past to multiple possible futures. What happens to individuals when their social world is knocked out? Epidemiologists have looked at this since the early 70s, and what you find is these individuals die sooner. Well, there's a term for perceived social isolation. It's been around long before I started studying this, and it's the term loneliness. Robert Weiss really kind of opened up scientific study of loneliness with the book he published about 35 years ago now. And he talked about loneliness as gnawing chronic disease without redeeming features. Well, we've all felt the emptiness and pain of loneliness. I have to admit, it certainly felt that way. But as a scientist, when we've examined it, we've decided, and I'm going to try to convince you, that it's anything but. Instead, it's one of the important features that gives us our humanity.